So much for being here so that we can work our way through the Torah with our Musar Torah commentary. And as we prepare to jump in, let's start with our blessing over Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה הפוך בה לעסוק בדברי תורה ידעי And today we get to focus on bitachon, which I think is one of the absolute most difficult, one of the midot of the different pieces to focus on, this idea of trust, of letting go and being able to just kind of let life take you where it will. And we're going to be looking specifically at a couple of different pieces from this week's Torah portion, Behar, starting with this idea of the Shemitah year, of letting land rest. So does anyone want to just read this text in the English? Is it big enough? I can make it probably a little bigger, if that's helpful.
I can read it.
Thanks, Ray.
Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of 6 years. You may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of
God.
Of God. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And so what essentially I have following this are a couple of commentaries based on specifically this first verse I have here. Okay, so the first one is when you enter the lands that I assign to you, or as this translation has it, when you come to the land which I give you. And then Ish Lakish, or Al-Shich rather, says, there is none who does not know that it is God who gives, for the earth is the eternal's and the fullness thereof. And this is also stated several times in the Torah. It therefore seems superfluous here. Why does the Torah mention it? So what do you think? Why is the Torah making a point of saying that the land belongs to God? Or that God has given us the land?
Well, I mean, God led us out of bondage.
Yeah. Oh, Michael, we're losing you.
I'm sorry, my computer.
Okay, we'd love to come back to you. We're just not able to see you or hear you now. If you want to write something in the chat, or if you want to play with it and then come back once the computer's working a little better, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Maybe it's really saying that we don't own anything. We're just here, and God does give us everything. And basically, we're like strangers, but we're borrowing everything, including the land and our own bodies as well.
So nothing belongs to us.
Right.
Yeah. And like, how does that change our perspective in life if we view things that way?
I think of it as the hubris of humans. We like to think we did everything, that we thought up this idea, that we did this and that we brought the seeds and all that. But as we're taught, if God made the world, we didn't. And if God provided the things, it is also, way back in Genesis, talking about that you are to be the guardians, the managers, the keepers of the world and everything in it. You don't own it and you didn't make it. And sadly, you could ruin it.
So there's a kind of humility and also a kind of responsibility that you're talking to.
Mhm.
They didn't have the technical ability to regenerate because planting was kind of a modern thing at the time, but they didn't have the modern advances we have now that we can do year-round farming. So the idea of giving it a rest every 7 years was a chance for it to regenerate. It's just, okay, it worked for us for 6 years. Now we have to give it a rest. Since then, of course, different things have taken over. But this is a Native American concept as well.
Mhm.
We don't own this
Yeah.
crop, and we have to nurture it. And they figured out ways to grow crops together so that the earth is regenerated every year. We put one crop on the whole field, or maybe another crop on the next field, and the agriculture won't stand that without some intervention, like crop rotation, or just letting it lay fallow for you.
Right. So you're pointing out a couple of things that I think are really important to underline, right?
Yeah.
There is a practical aspect of it.
Right.
That is absolutely there. No question about it, especially at this time. There is one challenge back to that, which you also kind of were hinting at, which is there are many ways in which to let the land rest, right?
Mhm.
You plant in this area, and then for 1 year, you let that particular area rest while you're planting over here. But that's not what's happening in our text. In our text, you plant the entire land, and then on the 7th year, everything rests. And that has different components to it as well, and certainly challenges that come with it too. Any other thoughts on this?
I'm thinking about what you just said. I never, it's like, why would you do it all or nothing at all? But on the other hand, if God made it, I guess that's it. But I don't, as a human, understand it. As Irv was pointing out, that rotation of crops, which is what I just spent several weeks in the Midwest, where the crops were just coming up, is you do change which crop is in which field, which is another way of doing it,
Yeah, and there are scholars who say, you know what, this was actually just kind of an idealistic way of doing it that wasn't really based in what could happen. There are scholars who said, no, it's very purposeful that it all be the same year, because one, farmers who are working all the time never have a break. And this is an opportunity to have a break to study Torah, to pray and to reconnect that otherwise wouldn't be had. And that was kind of interesting. And there's lots of other notions that are put out there as to why all of the land at once.
Well, it
Well, I
kind of
think
reminds
actually-
you of Joseph in Egypt.
Yes,
And the
exactly. That idea of famine.
But
Yeah,
also,
Jim.
it seems to me that because you're not going to be growing things in that 7th year, you're going to have to trust God that you'll have things to eat.
Absolutely.
Yeah, plan ahead. Joseph in Egypt.
Well, plan ahead. And also, there is this element that things are outside of your hands.
Yes.
There's only so much planning you can do, right?
It also sets up kind of a symmetry, it's a rhythm. And it's just another observance of a Sabbath, but it's a Sabbath year, not a Sabbath. But what would you relate that to all the other activities in life? I mean, I know it was an agrarian society at that time, but there were still other kinds of things going on. Would you take that year off if you were a cattle salesman or a herder or a butcher or something? But anyway, that question came into my mind. Why are we just talking about farmers? Well, the authors were in the middle of a big agrarian world.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really interesting take. It's so what about the animals? We are responsible for feeding those herds.
Yeah, and they were given, they were still able to graze and everything like that
Right.
but you're right.
And also, isn't like taking a year off would also teach us how to preserve food, start teaching us other techniques on how to live and how to pickle food and salt it and keep it preserved for a year. So, I mean, it's an education to learn how to save food.
Not to take for granted that it'll always be there. Right. Although with, floods and drier years and things like that, I imagine farmers were acquainted with that. But this is in a different kind of way. Right. So let's go back to this idea that was brought up just a moment ago of the Shemitah year as a kind of Shabbat. And we have it written right here, right? In the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of God. So what's that connection between Shabbat and this year of rest, this year of Shemitah?
It's the seventh of day of the week and 7th year of life. By God.
We got parts of that, Michael. We didn't get all of it. I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me now?
It's going in and out still.
All right. All right.
Sorry, Michael, but we did hear that there's a correlation with the number 7. Just as Shabbat is the 7th day of the week, so too is Shemitah the 7th year and this time of rest. Anyone else have any thoughts on that, on Shemitah and Shabbat?
Well, if you look at Shemitah as a time to refresh yourself, refresh your faith, take that time that would usually be used to till the fields, to read the Torah, or to talk, or to do, if you think of it as 365 days of Shabbat, what would that look like? Because in Shabbat, you still have to feed your family and you still have to feed your animals. I mean, it's not you aren't, but it refocuses what you would do every 7th year. It's like a really long Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
That's beautiful. And along that same line, so this week, Reform Judaism has a Devar Torah that they put out every week. And this week, it happens to be done by Rabbi Emily Langowitz, who does education through the Union of Reform Judaism. And she focuses, I encourage you to read it because I found it to be really powerful. She focuses on the 2 words here, Shabbat, Shabbaton, which means kind of like a great Sabbath, right? A complete Sabbath. And she talks about how in our everyday life, we can get caught in all sorts of patterns and suppositions. And that perhaps what this correlation is doing is just as we on Shabbat Shabbaton, on Yom Kippur, just as we let go of our vows, let go of things that went wrong, let go of the past so that we can have a more promising future, so too, perhaps the Shemitah year is an opportunity to let go of our preconceived notions about things and to give us the opportunity to explore and to grow in ways that we didn't think we were able to, which I think is pretty powerful.
Is my microphone working now?
Yes, it is. Go
Sounds
ahead,
like it.
Michael.
No, I have nothing important to. I tell you that all the time.
Oh, now it's not.
Have to send a message to the LA County tax collector and tell them and that I really I shouldn't have to pay.
Sorry, Michael, we're having trouble hearing you again.
Yeah.
Sorry, I know that's so frustrating. But if you want to write something in the chat, that'd be amazing. This way we can all look at that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have these two ideas so far, right? That God has given us this land and that the Shemitah year is compared to the Sabbath. I want to take us to one more commentary based on those same verses, also referring back to Shabbat of God. And Sforno says, it's Shabbat to God so that during this whole year, the farmer, instead of serving the soil, which requires cultivation, will turn his efforts serving God directly instead. Just as the weekly Sabbath is a day set aside for intensive service of the eternal, so the Shemitah year is to serve the same purpose. We're refocusing our attention, not on the mundane, but on the holy, right? I'm going to move us ahead just a little bit more to another related concept, which is one of the Jubilee. So not only was there a Shemitah year on the 7th year, but as this Torah portion is teaching us, there's also something special that happens in the 50th year. It says, and you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a Jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to your holding, and each of you shall return to your family. That 50th year shall be a Jubilee for you. You shall not sow, neither shall you reap the aftergrowth or harvest the untrimmed vines, for it is a Jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You may only eat the growth direct from the field. And this year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to your holding. So what's happening here? The 7th year, the 49th year in the 50-year cycle, right, is a Shemitah year. If that isn't enough, the 50th year is also a year when nothing is planted or sown. So there are 2 years in a row when you have the Jubilee year that are this pause.
Isn't there more to this Jubilee year? Thing about freeing slaves or forgiving debts, things like that.
Yeah, that also, that's related to Shemitah too.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
There's a component of it that's related to Shemitah, but you're right. Jubilee year is definitely, that's a big component of things. It's not just about the land, it's also about society.
Isn't that where Shabbat, when you get a break from your career and you go away for months, stuff that's
like sabbatical?
Sabbaticals.
Yeah, that comes from the number 7, which relates back to the Shemitah year.
Okay.
Unfortunately, these days, there are not too many people who work in the same place for 50 years, right?
True. So if the 50th year, I'm just playing with this idea. Actually, I was thinking about it just before this this class as well. Because my own year has been so focused on family and problems within the family and family getting back together and seeing friends and all of that. It seems to me in the world that we live in now today, I know my family is spread out all over the country, and I have a bunch of family who are in Brazil. So you don't see them very often at all. And it is, how do you keep the family whole? Over the years, things happen that are good and things happen that are bad. And I am also the oldest person in my family. So I think a lot about the family itself. I think about forgiveness. I think about truth. I think about things that happened that were extremely not good, and also things that happened that were very, very good, and what the consequences of both are. So when I think of that 50th year and you say, each of you shall return to your family, I'm like, well, now that would be really interesting in my family. And what are the roles of each of us within the family? If you look at that structure alone, you know, what are the strengths and the weaknesses, and what would you want to be, I'm going to say different rather than better, because it might not be better. It might just be a different kind of better. And if we thought of that every 50 years, let me see, this year in my family, my direct family, we are 79, 77, 75, and 73. So that's the top layer. You know, we aren't going to live all that much longer. Hopefully we might live another 25 years, but probably not another 50th year. That would be extremely unusual.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting, right? And there is this idea that the Shemitah and the Jubilee years aren't just about those years. The hope is that it will have some sort of effect on all the years in between. So maybe if it's in our practice that every 50th year, family comes together, that every 7th year, we really are focusing on ourselves and challenging any suppositions and working on the things in our lives that we need to work on, then perhaps all those years in between, we're more likely to create these moments for connection. I think that's beautiful. As you might have seen in the Musar Torah commentary for this week, when we were focusing on bitachon, on trust, there were some of these different comments, and I want to kind of move us in those directions now. We've been talking about it, but a little bit on the periphery, so I'd like to bring it into the foreground. Rabbi Mark Margolis taught, unlike most mitzvot, which can be performed in the moment, the Shemitah, the 7th year, right, and the Yovel, the Jubilee year, mitzvot are enacted over a period of a full year. In a midrash on Psalm 103:20, blessed the eternal, oh, the eternal's angels, mighty creatures who do God's bidding, ever obedient to the eternal's bidding. Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha comments, this refers to those who observe Shemitah. It is customary for a person to perform a mitzvah for a day, a week, or a month. Does one usually observe a mitzvah for an entire year? Yet the farmer lets the fields lie fallow for a year, the vineyard for a year, and remains silent. Is there greater strength of character than this?
Huh.
So what is the great character being spoken about here?
Follow through.
I mean, that's hard to do, to make a commitment for an entire year and to stick with it.
He's giving up his income for a year. He has to survive on what he has, or she has. So it's really a severe test for a person to do this every 7 years. And this,
Yeah.
To me, it's a test, and it takes a great bit of character to go through a test that's this severe.
Yeah. So if you know that you could do something that will give you more security, how much strength and willpower does it take to not follow through on that and to just completely trust in God? And that brings us to this question here, right? Keeping these commandments is difficult, so they come with great rewards according to our Torah, right? So what might get in the way of someone observing Shemitah or the Jubilee year for that matter?
Well, illness or saving a life would be the two that are right out of Torah.
Yes, right. If someone is, their life is in danger, truly in danger, right? You do whatever you can. If someone is sick, okay, that there might be some more things to think about there.
I think the challenge is, I think about this every New Year's, and it amused me every New Year, both the secular and the Jewish New Year, which is we say, okay, so, this is going to be a really good year, and I'm going to do all these 12 things for a year. And I always say to people, probably not, choose one. Because we get, other things happen in the year, good stuff, bad stuff, who knows what's going to happen. Even keeping that one, the temptation is, I'm tired today. I have something else to do today. I forgot. And once you've forgotten once, it's easy to forget again. We're not really good. Most of us, I'll speak for myself. I'm not that good at following something, it's like every day, every day, every day, every day, every day. You trip, and you can either say, well, we're done, or you can say, I made a mistake, I'm human, I'm picking it up again the next day. So if you're looking at a personal thing, if you're looking at the farmer, he's got to, let's say that he needs to let the field lie fallow. He's certainly hoping that there's not a flood, among other things.
Okay.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
I wonder too, if you're a farmer, if someone is not practicing and then you see them doing it, right? You see them having a good yield this year because they farmed when they weren't. And I think that would be one of the things that always go, well, if they're doing it, why can't I do it, right? And so that would be my one, I think the one concern you were saying, why would other people want to not do this rest for years? Maybe people is inside saying, well, I don't want them to get ahead of me, but this is trusting in God, that God's going to get you ahead and not worry about what the other farmer or other person's doing. Kind of the way I get it.
Yeah.
Is everybody on the same cycle, Rabbi? Is everybody on the same 7th Shemitah
Yes.
year?
Yes. Yeah, it's based on the Hebrew calendar. So if there is a year that is divisible by 7, such as our current year, it's a Shemitah year. If it's a year that is divisible by 50, then it's a Jubilee year.
I'll go back to what one of the theories I've thought about a lot of years is that with every modern advance, we lose something. Every generation, and then every period of time when we become now everybody's digitized. It's but we lose a lot along the way, and I think this is just a reminder of something we've lost, because I don't know anybody in my life that has ever done this or akin to this.
Right. I mean, and this also, like the way in which it's written in the Torah, right? In 7 years. If you're in the land of Israel, you let the land lay fallow. Okay, well, many of us aren't in the land of Israel, and we're not farmers. So then what does this actually mean for us right now?
Well, we need something to help build our character each year. That's really what we're talking about, the strength of character.
Yeah, and actually, by the way, because this year is a Shemitah year, and it says my internet connection is unstable, so I hope I'm not going to have issues. But because this year is a Shemitah year, that's why I chose to do the Musar Torah commentary this year. Because my thought was that was something that I in my soul needed, and I had a feeling that many of us could also be able to connect with it in a meaningful way. And the other part of it is that I am so inspired by the incredible work that Bonnie is doing. And I saw that, Bonnie, you're here now, and I'm so glad you are, in terms of Musar, and just thought it was a great thing to be able to start to bring to the community. She has training in this. I do not, but I think that all of us can connect with it. So these are great questions to really think about. What is Musar, or what, not Musar, certainly what does Musar mean in our lives, and can we connect to that? Because I think there's wonderful things here, but what Shemitah can mean for us and how we can make that meaningful for the next few months of this year that we have of our Shemitah year. I'm going to go to the next text here, but certainly feel free to jump in. So another piece from the Musar Torah commentary this week. For the medieval Spanish Jewish philosopher Bache ibn Bakuda, Behar teaches us teaches that each of us must be ready to move on and relocate and not feel settled and secure. Noting that the soul is also a stranger in the world, going back to what you were saying before, Sandy, right? All people are like strangers here. As the verse says, because you are strangers and temporary residents with me. The mitzvot of the sabbatical and jubilee years, therefore, teach us to notice our natural human inclination toward attachment and to strife, over and over to surrender that predilection. In a sermon entitled To Hold with Open Arms, Rabbi Milton Steinberg captured this paradox after he recovered from a near-fatal heart attack. Steinberg stressed the need to live fully and joyfully, with the awareness of our impermanence, learning to clasp the world, but with relaxed hands, to embrace it, but with open arms. Practicing bitachon means, as Steinberg taught, to care for ourselves, others, and our world without succumbing to the illusion that we possess anything. Just want us to take in those words and to respond to them in our own way.
I would take the last two sentences. The need to live fully and joyfully with the awareness of our impermanence. I always think of the serenity prayer when I read something like that. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And it's like, we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. You learn from your mistakes. You can choose to learn from your mistakes. My experience is if you don't, they happen again anyway. And, it's like, let's try it again this time. And practicing as, to care for ourselves, others, in our world. I think that's what we've been talking about this entire time.
Yeah. And by the way, this phrase that Milton Steinberg uses here, right? This idea of living fully and joyfully with the awareness of our impermanence, that to me is Sukkot in a nutshell, right? It's the most joyful holiday that we have. There could be some argument there about Purim and stuff, but it's the most joyful holiday in the Torah, right? And why? Because we're in a sukkah, we realize how precious life is. On Yom Kippur, we come face to face with our own mortality. And on Sukkot, we say, yeah, we know we're in the elements. There's things we don't have control over, but we're going to live fully anyway. Not even anyway, we're going to live fully because that's the case. Yeah, Bonnie, please.
What happened with
Okay, I'm sorting out so many things right now in my personal life and how I know that this year, as the Shemitah year, is going to be a year very different for me. Because with this health condition that's been discovered and I have something wrong with my bone marrow, and I'm going to be having some light chemo, and then further down the line there's going to be a bone marrow transplant. And my Shemitah year, which this is I get to stop doing as much. It's like a real twist in that, this is my year to sit back and allow this process of treatment and curing what I have, because it is curable, but to let others do for me. And I'm going, hey, God, you really got me good for this year, that I get to accept the relaxed, if you want to call it that, relaxing my doing for others. And yet, if I look at it from the Musar perspective, what I'm doing is allowing others to do for me, which is the completion of that mitzvah of generosity, of giving and receiving. And I've always had trouble with receiving. So this one has really knocked me forever. It's 11 days since I found out, and I'm still processing and sorting things out. And I want to continue my teaching. And I think that what I'm living through is going to be my next level of teaching. That how can I apply all of these tools that I have years and years and years and years and years and use what I'm going through as a lesson to share with others. I think I just got that, Rabbi.
I think that's pretty profound, Bonnie, and you have community around you as you go through this process.
Thank you. Yeah, I just got this. That's why I'm here.
I love that line in here that says, clasp the world, but with relaxed hands, to embrace it, but not with open arms. And I think of holding grains of sand too tightly and they just fall through your fingers. And relating it to everything in life, even holding other people too tightly. Anything we do has to be with those relaxed hands and open arms. I think that's just so nice and beautiful here.
Yeah.
And I share that, Sandy. I was thinking about children and grandchildren, just letting them go.
Yeah.
It's tough.
There's a beautiful reading that I sometimes go back to, sometimes during funerals and sometimes before we go to the mourner's cottage. When the prayer says, when I die, like, give me away. And there's a line in there that says exactly what you just said about letting go of children who need to be free. And it has that same kind of feeling. To love wholly, to love fully, but not to clasp too tightly, to just kind of trust and let it be.
Mm-hmm. I'm enjoying that you said holy and holy, to love in both ways. Holiness and entirely.
Yeah.
And it's also a reminder that we're not here for a very long time.
True.
And we need to every once in a while have this Shabbat. I mean, that's what Shabbat is for me. It's a time for thinking where we are, what we're doing, get out of the mad pace of life. Even if you're retired, some of the busiest people I know are retired people. And so I'm going to call this the Bitcoin paragraph.
I don't know if Bitcoin's so popular right now, but I think this is really powerful.
I don't
Oh, Michael, we're having so much trouble hearing you. I'm so sorry.
I don't know. My microphone is on and the red light is on. I don't know what's wrong with the thing.
I don't know what to tell you. I wish I could magically fix it for you.
Okay.
When I was going through various texts and I was thinking about bitachon, I came back to this passage from Jeremiah, because I wonder if it has something to teach us about trust and bitachon as well. And Jeremiah teaches, blessed is he who trusts in the eternal, whose trust in the eternal is the eternal alone. He shall be like a tree planted by waters, sending forth its roots by a stream. It does not sense the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh. It has no care in a year of drought. It does not cease to yield fruit. And I'm wondering, in looking at these verses, one, why does the verse insist that a person trusts in God alone rather than in God in addition to? We look at this first verse.
Hmm.
Blessed is he who trusts in God alone.
Well, because anything else that's you're trusting in is also made by God. If God made everything, then anything I'm going to trust in is also in it. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, don't put trust in anything else other than God. That's what I've come to know as a fact. So, but it's, you know, it's just being, I think it's just being a very real topic that, you know, almost anything actually is going to let you down if you put so much faith or put anything else on a pedestal other than your faith in God.
One way of looking at it is God is eternal, we are not.
Mm.
I love I've always liked these first two verses. You know, he shall be like a tree planted by water, sending forth its roots by a stream. It does not sense the coming of heat. Its leaves are ever fresh, even when we think they aren't, you know. It has no care in the year of drought. It doesn't cease to yield fruit. It's like no matter what comes on, it's like that cycle of life. You know, you could even think of the Lion King, you know, and the music in the Lion King.
You know, it's funny, I see the second question about is a tree by water an apt metaphor?
Yeah.
And personally,
Yes.
when we just read it, I didn't like it at first because I keep thinking that the way I would prefer to see it is a tree in the desert where the roots are so deep, and that's why it's able to flourish. But that was just my first response in hearing this.
That's interesting. So that it would be something that kind of defied what you would have expected.
Right, but according to God's wisdom and plan, that even that tree in extreme heat can send its roots out and still live.
Yeah. Water is such a powerful metaphor. So is desert, right? Like the Midbar, the desert that's where we got the Torah. That's where we became a people. There's so much that happened in the desert. It's where we connected with God and entered into a covenant. I mean, there's so much. And water also is this powerful symbol, the water that we went through in order to get to freedom. The water of Miriam's well given to us in the desert, that Miriam always knew where to find that water. And water is also a very common metaphor in Kabbalah, in the Zohar, of being like a source of God, a source of wisdom, and a source of sustenance, personal sustenance. So I wonder, like, any other reactions or thoughts about a tree by water being a connection to bitachon?
Well, to me, what I'm hearing, can you hear me?
Yeah. Go ahead, Miss.
So with that first verse, blessed is he who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord alone. It's like, be still, listen to the Lord, be in the Lord. So everything else, and that's a really hard thing to do, you know, to be still in the Lord, because there's so many other aspects, right? Versus when I have the image of a tree, you know, nothing else is going to, a tree is a tree, right? It's just there. And water is life. You know, as you pointed out, that's such a critical element, and it's key in so many faiths, because that's what we're based on, is water. And who gave us water? It was God. So he will feed us. He will take care of all of our needs, but we need to be still in the Lord, and give 100% to him. And that's something I think, I know I struggle with, because there's so many other distractions that come in. And the concept of being still for a year, oh my gosh. You know, 1 hour is always a challenge, you know, when you go to services, or you just set aside time to pray and be still. So it's interesting, the roots by the stream. So to me, a desert is really harsh. It's interesting that she envisioned the tree in the desert, but the desert to me is just so harsh. But when I have the image of a stream, it's refreshing and life-giving. So.
Yeah, I imagine it's harder to have bitachon, trust in God, if the image is a tree in the midst of a desert, right? Because there's no logical reason why this tree should be flourishing in the middle of a desert, right? It just defies it. So how do you have trust in something that seems to be so outside of the usual? Or maybe that's more the reason to trust it, because here's something that's sacred. It's very interesting. I find it fascinating. I really love reading books that relate to nature and ecosystems and things like that. There is a podcast that came out several years ago called From Tree to Shining Tree that I encourage you to listen to. And it actually talks about how the tree works in terms of getting nutrients into the tree. That we think that, some water by the tree has everything it needs, or just because there is good soil, the tree has everything it needs. But actually, a tree is completely ineffective at getting nutrients out of the soil. The way that a tree stays healthy is by relying on other living things that do the work for them, and these symbiotic relationships formed beneath the surface of the earth. And if we think of that too, I think that might actually add an element here, that there are things that we can't see. We're completely unaware of these things that are happening underneath the surface, and yet we have trust in them. We have faith in them, and we have a respect for them.
And they have to fight for sunlight. If you're a small tree growing, or if you're a different species of tree growing, you're in competition with every tree around you that's above you.
Yes and no. Listen to the podcast.
Okay.
Because they all work together and they help one another out. It's so interesting, just how all of that works. I think it's a really good metaphor for human beings too, the way that we can rely on one another so that all of us can thrive.
Can you hear me at all? I want can I be heard at all?
We can hear you just a little bit.
Sorry. Okay, so I think the main word, maybe it's been said before, is trust, right?
Sorry, Michael, we're having so much trouble hearing you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, all right.
What I was going to say is that I think what maybe Mike might be talking about, Michael might be talking, like, imagine if you're the tree in the desert and you're going to look up to God and be like, why'd you put me here? But here all along, there's the reason why, and that you're going to be okay. You're going to be taken care of. And sometimes we get put in spots, right, where we're like, why am I here? But God's got us. Like, he's got us. And I think that's what to me, that's what it started to say, is that it depend on where God put you. He put you there for a reason. He put that tree in that desert for a reason, so it can grow at the right spot in the right time, and to trust the plan, to trust in God's plan, I guess.
Yeah, and we see a little of that here, right? Because it says, it is no care in a year of drought. Well, if you're by a stream, but the stream doesn't have water, that's the same kind of thing, isn't it?
But we've all been given free will, and to act one way, or a positive way, or to act a negative way. So you have to rely on yourself as well. I mean, you can have everything and still not live a decent life, or prosperous or happy life. So it's I think we're leaving out the person in this a little bit.
So there's a little bit of that we're coming back to also. And Rabbi Mark Mogola speaks to a little bit of what I think you're saying, Irv, and tell me if I'm wrong here. But he says practicing bitachon does not require passive reliance on that flow. Rabbinic tradition calls upon us not to trust in supernatural intervention, but rather to exert our own efforts to make manifest the divinity latent in the world. Practicing bitachon involves active, intentional engagement with an underlying, often unnoticed, and supportive process that we perceive, trust, and reveal through our words and actions.
You said it a lot better than I did, but that's what I was thinking.
It's always this balance, right? If we go too far in one direction, then we get out of whack and we lose sight of the bigger picture. If we rely so much on ourselves and we're so sure that we have all the answers, well, that's just going to set us up for disaster too, won't it? Right? So I'm looking at the time and I want to move us to the last pieces here. Okay, we'll go through this really quickly because we need this text in order to understand the one underneath it. So this is a little bit later in the Torah portion, which says, and should you ask, what are we to eat in the 7th year if we may neither sow nor gather in our crops? I will ordain my blessing for you in the 6th year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the 8th year, you will still be eating old grain of that crop. You will be eating the old until the 9th year, until its crops come in. But the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. And in her commentary, if you look at the sheet, this is actually a link to the commentary itself if you wanted to read that. But Amy Newman says, God knows that the people will worry about not having enough to eat in the 7th year, and God promises to provide extra in the 6th year before Shemitah. Bnei Israel, or the people of Israel, haven't had the chance to show God that they will fulfill the mitzvah and let the land rest, but God seems to trust that they will and promises extra food in advance of Shemitah. God is teaching us here about the nature of trust. God demonstrates that by trusting us, we will know that we can trust God. As we try to mend our communal structures and begin to come back together, the parasha, the Torah portion's lessons about bitachon and trustworthiness can help us forge stronger bonds with God and with each other. And if we are able to cultivate this bitachon, God assures us at the end of Behar, our Torah portion, that we will have security and peace. So God's kind of anticipating some of our anxieties. One of the things, Frank, that you mentioned before, right? One of the things that can get in the way of us following this is fear. Fear that we don't have what we need, fear and uncertainty. And here God is saying, I got your back, right? If only we always had that kind of assurance. But the Torah offers it in this case, right? I want to bring us, I'm just going to bring us back to this final text down here, which is one by Alan Morenis, who teaches, it's not our job description to become happy and fulfilled. The truth is that everyone who is alive is subject to the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Yet it is only when you are running after the elusive goal of being happy that this world seems so terrible. If you think you're supposed to be the master of your life, if that were possible, the terrible happenings that inevitably come your way in this imperfect world are defeats. They make happiness impossible. But the Jewish tradition actually gives us a different job description, one that fits much better with this world just as it is. It advises us not to seek happiness, but to recognize instead that we are meant to be servants of God. From that vantage point, the world seems a rather fitting place to live, even with all its shocks and sorrows. As a servant of God, the challenges of life are just the stuff of a day's labor in the fields of the eternal. Though the direct pursuit of happiness is a surefire recipe for suffering, living your life as a servant of God paradoxically makes happiness possible. I wonder what you make of that text, this teaching by Alan Morenis.
take it. If I'm a servant of God and my job is to make others around me comfortable, then God will make me comfortable. That's what I kind of take from it. As long as my thought is on others and not myself, God will make me completely happy and comfortable.
So you're defining servant of God as giving of ourselves to others.
His other children, absolutely.
I think
Isn't
it's
this-
it's actions. It's how I think the trust comes when you are doing things, as Frank is mentioning, when you're thinking of others rather than yourself, and you get more comfortable with yourself and your relationship with God.
Yeah, and I just want to uplift in the chat here on a very similar line to what you're saying, Michael. Or what you're saying, Irv. Michael was writing in the chat that trust is the most important word in so many of the texts that we had, right? That's the focus, is this idea of trust, trusting in God in good and bad times. And that's the challenge for all of us, certainly.
Isn't the concept here, which you had mentioned some time ago, the concept of Hesed? I mean, the whole idea that you show compassion and thoughtfulness to others.
Yeah, all of these different midot definitely come together, right? Each one affects the other one. When one of them is out of whack, some of the other ones also are. And Bonnie, I love that your license plate is bitachon. I think that is so wonderful because it's a reminder, not only for you, but for everyone around you who knows what bitachon means, of just the importance of this. It's beautiful.
I think that trusting others is empowering others. And I think it's one of the nicest ways to show respect for other human beings. It's a way of not just being courteous, but to expressing the value of other people and how privileged each of us are to have people in our lives. And so I like the idea of, I mean, I've seen it so often when trust is displayed, how a person stands up straighter, feels better. A child feels more significant if they feel trusted.
Yeah. And the importance also of all of us doing our part to earn the trust of one another, right?
I think it'd be really shameful if someone put a trust in me and I let them down somehow. That would really hurt. So I think the communication goes along with that too, because sometimes that happens when you're talking past each other and you're not hearing, and something happens, and then I've seen it in our families where people were angry with each other for years over something very, very nonsensical.
Yeah. So being able to have clear communication, being able to kind of trust in the way things are, and to live as our best selves can go a long way. But the focus of this portion with Shemitah really is when things come our way that send us for a loop, when things come our way that are absolutely wonderful, wherever we go in the cycle of life of ups and downs, that we can have some trust in ourselves and others, and most especially in God, that we will be able to get through it all. So I hope that this has given some comfort and a little bit of something special to all of us today that we can take with us. And I am so looking forward to seeing many of you, whether online or in person, at all of the wonderful events coming up this weekend. I also want to invite you next Tuesday, when Rabbi Feinstein is going to be teaching through the Taos Lecture Series next Tuesday. don't have the title of it off the top of my head, but it's something about what our faith teaches us about getting through difficult times. So it's somewhat related to our Torah portion today. And then on June 2nd, I have confirmed that Rabbi Barry Block, who the editor of the Musar Torah commentary, is going to be with us right here on Zoom. So that should be wonderful as well. Hope everyone has a Shabbat Shalom. I look forward to seeing you at all the things ahead. Bye, everyone.